Alrighty, this is chapter 21, section 2, the reign of Louis XIV. And the main idea, after a century of war and riots, France was ruled by Louis XIV, the most powerful monarch of his time. Now, why does this matter now? Louis's abuse of power led to a revolution that would inspire the call for a democratic government throughout the world. In 1559, Henry II of France died, leaving 4 young sons. 3 of them ruled, but one after the other, but they all proved incompetent, meaning they couldn't do their jobs. The real power behind the throne during this period was their mother, Catherine, and Catherine tried to preserve the royal authority by growing conflicts between Catholics and Huguenots, and those are French Protestants, rocked the country. Between 1562 and 1598, Huguenots and Catholics fought 8 religious wars. Chaos spread throughout France. So in 1572, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in Paris sparked a 6-week nationwide slaughter of Huguenots. So the Catholics were destroying these guys called the Huguenots, who were French Protestants, another form of Christianity. The massacre occurred when many Huguenot nobles were in Paris. They were attending a marriage of Catherine's daughter to a Huguenot prince. Interesting. Henry of Navarre. Most of these nobles died, but Henry survived. So, if you ever saw Game of Thrones, there's a scene in there called the Red Wedding, and this is probably where he got the idea for that. Descended from the popular medieval King Louis, what is that, the ninth? Yes. King Louis IX, Henry was robust, athletic, and handsome. In 1589, when both Catherine and her last son died, Prince Henry inherited the throne. He became Henry the Fourth, and he was the first king of the Bourbon dynasty in France. And as king, he showed himself to be decisive, fearless in battle, and a clever politician. And many Catholics, including the people of Paris, opposed Henry for the sake of his war-torn country. Henry chose to give up Protestantism and become a Catholic. And in 1598, Henry took another step towards healing France's wound. He declared that the Huguenots could live in peace in France and would not set their own houses of worship in some cities. This declaration of religious tolerance was called the Edict of Nantes. Edict of Nantes. Aided by the advisor who enacted wise financial policies, Henry devoted his reign to rebuilding France and its prosperity. He restored the French monarchy to a strong position, so king and queens took over again. And after a generation of war, most of the French people welcomed this peace. But some people, however, hated Henry for his religious compromises. So he was a Catholic. He said it was okay for the Huguenots, the people that were getting slaughtered, to do their thing in the country of France. But some people were not okay with this. So in 1610, a fanatic leaped into a royal carriage and stabbed this dude to death. So Henry was trying to do some good. He was trying to get some religious tolerance passed and have everyone kind of get along together. Religion was a big thing back then. So just because you were Christian, it depends what type of Christianity you followed. That was a big thing for them. All right, so after Henry's death, his son Louis VIII reigned. Louis was a weak king, but in 1624 he appointed a strong minister who made up for all of his own weaknesses. And his name was Cardinal Rachel. He was pretty much the ruler of France. He kind of took over. For several years, he had been a hardworking leader of the Catholic Church of France, and although he tried sincerely to lead according to moral principles, he was also ambitious and really enjoyed exercising authority. And as Louis VIII's minister, he was able to persuade his ambitions to the political arena. He took steps to increase the power of the monarchies, meaning he strengthened the powers of what the king and queen could do. First thing he did too, he moved against the Huguenots. So this guy was Catholic, so he didn't want these Huguenot guys hanging out in France. He believed that Protestantism, who the Huguenots were, often served as an excuse for political conspiracies against the Catholic king. So they were they were planning to overthrow the king. So he didn't like this. Although Raphael did not take away the Huguenots' right to worship, he forbid Protestant cities to have walls. So he wouldn't let these guys have walls surrounding their cities, which could be potentially dangerous at that time because you got a bunch of raiders coming in there. Stuff was crazy back then. He didn't want them to be able to defy the king and then withdraw and gaining some strong defenses. With a wall, I mean, that would provide it. So these guys were out in the open. Second, he sought to weaken the nobles' power. So he's taken away from the rich. He didn't want rich people to have too much power. He ordered nobles to take down their fortified castles. He increased the power of the government. He increased the power of government agents who came from the middle class. The king rallied on these agents, so there was less need to use noble officials. Raphael also wanted to make France the strongest state in Europe. The greatest obstacle to this, he believed, were the Habsburg rulers whose lands surrounded France. The Habsburgs ruled Spain, Austria, and the Netherlands, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire. So we're talking about a huge empire here. To limit the Habsburg power, Raphael involved France in the 30 Years' War. Not sure if that was a good decision. All right, as France regained political power, a new French intellectual movement started to develop. French thinkers had witnessed the religious wars with horror, and what they saw turned them towards skepticism. And skepticism is the idea that nothing can ever be known for certain. So if you ever heard someone say, hey, what are you, skeptical? That means, well, I don't really know about that. I'm kind of skeptic about that. So you have the idea that nothing can be ever known for certain. These thinkers expressed the attitude of doubt towards churches that claim to have the only correct set of doctrines. So the church is always saying, hey, we know everything, you don't. To doubt these old ideas, skeptics thought was the first step towards finding the truth. All right. So we got this guy called Michael Montaigne, and he lived during the worst years of the French religious wars, and after his death, a dear friend of his thought deeply about life's meaning, and to communicate his ideas, Michael developed a new form of literature called the essay. And an essay is a brief work that expresses a person's thoughts and opinions. And in one essay, he pointed out that whenever a new belief arose, it replaced an old belief that people once accepted as the truth. In the same way, he went on that the new belief would also probably be replaced by something different in the future. And for these reasons, this Michael guy believed that humans could never have absolute knowledge of what is true. Some interesting things. This guy sounds like a philosopher. All right, Descartes, another French writer, was Rene Descartes. He was a brilliant thinker. In his Meditations of the First Philosophy, Descartes examined the skeptical argument that one could never be certain of anything. He used observations in his reason to answer such arguments. That's great for him. Okay, moving on. Louis XIV comes into power. The efforts of Henry XIV and Raphael helped strengthen the French monarchy and paved the way for the most powerful ruler in French history. And that's going to be Louis XIV. And In Louis's view, he and the state were one and the same. He was also heard saying or boasted, I am the state, so meaning I control everything. And although Louis XIV became the strongest king of his time, if not the strongest in history, he was only 4 years old when he began his reign. So that's not very old. So when Louis became king in 1643, after his death of his father Louis the Eighth, the true ruler of France, was Rachel's successor, um, Cardinal Mazarin, and his greatest triumph came in 1648 with ending the 30 Years' War. That's a pretty long war. Many people of France, particularly the nobles, hated this guy because he increased taxes and strengthened the central government. So in 1648 to 1653, there was a violent riot to oppose this guy that tore France apart. And at times, the nobles who led the riots threatened the young king's life, which was Louis XIV. So even after the violence was over, Louis never forgot his fear for and anger over the nobilities who were. So the noblemen were. These guys were causing these riots and causing people to get up and stand behind the nobles. So Louis XIV always remembered this, and he never forgot this. He was determined to become so strong that he could never even be threatened by them again. So I think this is where Louis XIV is like, you know what? I'm going to put my hand down. I'll put my foot down. I'm going to do something about this when I become king. So I think that's a good stopping point for today. And we will pick up with this lesson in our next lesson. So thanks for listening. Hopefully you learned something. Peace out.